done another thing that we talked about doing, which was adding those law enforcement officials that I mentioned earlier. As I said, that was one of my first thoughts about the office, was having worked with the auditor's reports over the last few years. I noticed time and time again that decisions got made that would not have been made by law enforcement professionals. It doesn't mean that the people in the office are not smart. They are. It doesn't mean that they're not passionate. They are. Great people in the auditor's office. But when you're conducting a special investigation that you expect might end up in a courtroom, you need to be running it through somebody's brain that thinks the way courtroom works. And I've had cases where we've actually had to go to trial without the auditor's office, without using their report, and I actually had to have my cop on the case do another investigation. That's a second person getting paid with taxpayer money to conduct part of their investigation, because we needed proof beyond a reasonable doubt rather than the assumptions that were in the auditor's report. So we have added Holly Ewing. Holly is a 12-year veteran of the Colorado State Patrol, and she also has 2 years of legal compliance work in Iowa. And we've added Blair Johnston. Blair was a tough one to recruit, but we won him over. He has 20 years of experience as a federal special agent in the Office of the Inspector General for Health and Human Services, which means he is very experienced in financial crime. He's very experienced with Medicaid, Medicare, and in addition to his law enforcement experience, he also has an accounting degree and an inactive CPA license that he can dust off. So he will fit in on pretty much any part of the office. So we're excited about that. And then I also campaigned on talking about making sure the office was run in a nonpartisan way. So one of the first decisions that I had to make was who I was going to hire. We had 2 senior deputies in the office that were retiring, scheduled retirements that they needed replacing, and the chief of staff was also leaving. So I had 3 roles that I needed to fill. I filled them with a Democrat and an independent and a Republican. All 3 very qualified people. And to me, it's really important that people are represented in the state even if they don't share someone's political party. They need to know that when we're sitting in the auditor's office making decisions about what we're going to put our resources into and how, that people who think like them are represented. And so that's something that we did in our office very early on. I know that I talked a lot during the campaign about prosecuting both Democrats and Republicans. And I did that, and I am keeping it fair now because I think politics, I think governance, even if you're not in elected office, even if you're an assistant attorney general, needs to be focused on what the facts are and what the law is and the best way to solve problems. And I don't think that partisanship is the best way to solve problems. So that's a lot of what we've been doing is items that we campaigned on doing, and we've actually done quite a bit to accomplish all of them in 10 months, which I'm really proud of. 2 of the other things that I want to make sure I mention today are a bill that we're going to be introducing in the legislature, and also our statewide jobs, statewide work initiative. So when I say statewide jobs, statewide work, what it means is we're doing statewide work, so we should have statewide jobs. Pretty straightforward. Every county in this state, in every corner, has people from the auditor's office who come out from Des Moines, go out there, get hotels, stay for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and then go home again, back to the Des Moines area, and complete the audit report. It doesn't make any sense that everybody in the auditor's office has to live in Des Moines. We already have work that we do in every corner of the state. So if we have someone that's graduating from Iowa State and they want to come back and move back to Anamosa, we should say, great, no problem. We want you to be either in Ames, Iowa City, or Des Moines for 1 year, because you're brand new and you have no experience. We want to make sure you're working with people. But then after that year, you can go live wherever you want, and we're just going to assign you to work in that local area. This is a win-win-win-win. I have yet to think of a downside that is not outweighed by the upside of the same coin. So let's think about the employee. If you live in Des Moines, but you would rather live back in Decorah, where I grew up, or Anamosa, well, we can make you happier by letting you move back to your small town. That's a win for the employee, right? We're not forcing people to move, we're letting them if they want to. We surveyed our employees about this maybe 2 months ago. Of the eligible workforce that we've got, I'm pretty sure at least 10% immediately said they were interested in doing it immediately. And so in January, we're going to let people do it. It's also a win for our office. Why? The biggest single problem that our office has in serving taxpayers is turnover. We have a turnover rate that I've never imagined in state office in Iowa. It's kind of wild. And so what we're trying to do is lower that. Why do we want to lower it? Well, because right now we spend a huge amount of taxpayer resources training new employees. And they leave because they're living in an area in Des Moines with a lot of competition for accountants. So it's better for our office because if we let people live where they want, number one, they like their job more because it's in the geographic location where they want to be, so they're less likely to leave it. Number two, there's less competition in those geographic areas. There is no KPMG office in Anamosa, right? And there's no Principal Financial Group office in Decorah. So if somebody wants to go back to their hometown and live there, we have fewer competitors in that area that we need to compete with in order to keep them. That means that our turnover rate gets lowered, which means the resources we put into training new people gets lowered. It's also a win for our clients. So it's a win for the individual, for the office, and for clients. Why? 90% of our budget is actually self-generated, meaning we bill our clients for the work that we do. Our clients tell us over and over again, we would like to see the same people year after year instead of you always sending us new people. And is there anything you can do to lower costs? Well, if we have people who live in the area who are on staff, then they'll be the ones that get assigned to do those audits every year, and they'll be driving home every night. That mileage cost increase will be smaller than the decrease in cost due to hotel stays. Hotel stays are expensive, mileage is pretty cheap. So even if someone's driving a little bit further on a daily basis, we're going to save a lot of money for our clients in terms of hotel costs. And then finally, the last win is I think it's a win for the state. Jobs are needed in small communities. Des Moines is doing fine. Statewide elected officials do not need to be looking out for Des Moines. They need to be looking out for smaller communities. They need to be looking out for smaller towns. And if we have people in our office who want to be in a smaller community and we have the work in the area that can send them there and keep them busy, why would we not do that? I grew up in Decorah. I know what it's like when in a small town a storefront goes empty. I know how that's the talk of the town for 2 months. And I know how cheerful everybody is and the pep in the step you see when somebody fills it up again. We live and die together in small towns, and if in the state auditor's office we have, even if it's a dozen jobs that we can move into smaller communities, that's a good paying job, it's got good benefits, we're moving somebody back with a college education, and we're probably moving their family back with them. Those are good things that we can do to help support smaller communities in Iowa. So I'm really excited about that program. It kicks off officially January 1st. And we'll see people moving really to every corner of the state. I also think it's going to help with recruiting, because I think at Iowa State and Iowa you see a lot of folks who want to move back to their hometown. They just don't know if they can find a job there. But if we're advertising in a way that says, hey, come and work with us for a year and then you can go back, I'm betting that we'll get a lot of applicants who are excited about that. And then the last piece that I want to make sure we mention before we can begin with questions. Actually, there's two pieces. One is the bill that I mentioned. From my work in the state attorney general's office, I know that one of the most frustrating things that we can see, I think, in the criminal justice system is people in positions of trust and power who are not held accountable when they abuse that trust and abuse that power. Time after time again, you see people embezzle tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they don't serve a night in prison. It's wild. I think that should end. And to that end, we are offering a bill this year that would make felony theft of taxpayer funds a mandatory prison sentence. It doesn't mean that there's a mandatory minimum. So it doesn't mean you're going for 10 years at least, or 2 years at least, or even 1 year at least. It just means that it's got to be some time. You might only serve a month, you might serve 2 months, but that is better than nothing. I think this is particularly important because these are the kinds of crimes, if any, that we can deter by punishing them effectively, right? These people are not committing these crimes because they're desperate. They have a job. The job is what gives them access to the money. They are not committing these crimes because they are drunk or high every time they take extra money on a monthly or weekly basis. They're not committing these crimes because they're in a fit of passion, right? It's just cold, calculated greed. I see an opportunity, and I'm taking it. Even though that money's not mine, I don't care. If we are going to affect the calculus of people who are willing to do that, they need to know that that is going to result in serious consequences for them. Real accountability, essentially. So I'm hopeful. This is a very narrow bill. It only affects individuals stealing taxpayer money. I'm hopeful that the legislature will take it up. I don't imagine that it would be controversial. I certainly think that maybe the way to do it, you can have conversations about that, but at the end of the day, it's pretty narrow, and I think it would improve our criminal justice system. I'll touch on one more thing, and that's settlements from taxpayer money. One of the first things I did in the auditor's office was I had to take a vote on the settlements related to Dave Jamieson and what he was doing at the Iowa Finance Authority. If you need a recollection, Jamieson was the head of the Iowa Finance Authority, and he was committing really horrific acts of sexual harassment. The kind of thing that, even if you're skeptical of the idea, you would look at what he did and you would say, that's over the line and it's disgusting. Not only was he doing that, but he was also intimidating people who tried to stop him. So if he was sexually harassing someone in front of other people and they told him, hey, cut it out, that's not appropriate, he might say things like, you must be allergic to a paycheck. Yeah. So here's someone who's supposed to be working for us as taxpayers, telling someone else that's supposed to be working for us that you work for me and I'm going to do what I want with impunity, whether or not you like it. It's disgusting. So two of these women that he sexually harassed came forward. He got fired, and they provided the state notice that they were going to sue the state. The state conducted an investigation. Ultimately, the Attorney General's office reached a settlement with these two individuals for $4 million total. Having been paying attention to verdicts in sexual harassment cases, I don't have a particular quibble with the amount, given the facts of what happened. If we can save on the litigation side, that's a good thing. What I did quibble with was this. Are we going to make Dave Jamieson pay? Yes. I would hope so. He ought to, right?
Right. Well, it should.
He should. What are we doing to hold people accountable, right? And what are we doing to protect taxpayers? There's a piece of the law in Iowa that we have never used before in our state. And what it says is, if a state employee causes a loss to the public and their conduct is willful and wanton, pretty bad. Not as bad as beyond reasonable doubt, where we take away somebody's liberty, but also higher than a preponderance, which is what you've got to prove if you were to say that someone had sexually harassed you. You'd need to hit the preponderance standard. It's somewhere in between there. So if somebody causes a loss to the state and their conduct is willful and wanton, we can actually go after them and make them pay taxpayers back. Great piece of law. It's a good idea. And I just said, are we going to hold him accountable? Are we going to do that? And the reason that I care about doing that is twofold. Number one, to put taxpayers in a better position. I don't know how much Dave Jamieson has, money-wise. But I know he has a very healthy pension from having worked for the public for a long time. And I know that he's been making a decent amount of money for a very long time. So I think we can get something. I also don't care how much money Dave Jamieson has. I have never looked at a theft case and said, well, you stole money, but you don't have any left, so I'm not going to prosecute you. We do it because it's the right thing to do. It's also the right thing to do because what else are we going to do to protect workers in the workplace from sexual harassment? In addition to financial cases, the most common case that I prosecuted in the Attorney General's office were sex offenses. I prosecuted sex offenses all around the state. And when you pick a jury for any kind of a case, you're always going to explain to the potential jurors what kind of a case it is. Because if they have an experience with something like that, they might be too distracted by their own memories or their own emotions to really pay attention to the evidence that's coming in. Does that make sense? So we always say, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming today. We are going to be talking about a robbery. That's what this trial is going to be. Has anyone here ever been robbed? And if someone raises their hand, you say, well, what was that experience like? And if they say, I almost got stabbed, I thought I was going to die, it was really scary. You ask them, well, do you think you can sit here on this jury without getting too emotional, without thinking about your own experience? Do you think you can pay attention to all the evidence that comes in? And if they say, no, I think because of my experience I can't do that, then you say, thank you. You excuse that person, you say, we can probably have you serve on a different kind of jury for a different kind of case. And if we're picking a jury for a robbery case, we might have a person who says they've been robbed before. Theft case is a little bit different, a little more common. You might have two people who say, yeah, I had an investment advisor that I trusted that person and they robbed me blind. And I think about it, every time I think about it, I get steamed. And there's no way I can sit here and just focus on the evidence because the only thing I'm going to be thinking about is what happened to me. You say, okay, thanks. We'll find a different jury for you to serve on. Every time we pick a jury for a sex offense case, it's different. It takes a lot longer because of how many people have personal stories about having been raped or molested, or having their family members have been raped or molested, or having been harassed at such a level that they feared that they were going to be raped or molested or assaulted. And what we do is we say to everybody, this is going to be a case about a sex assault. And if you or anyone you know or anyone you love has had an experience like that, we'll go into the judge's chambers to talk about it because we know sometimes it's hard to talk about. And so we'll go back there, we'll sit there, just the attorneys and the judge, and people will come back one by one. And they tell us their stories one by one. I've sat there and I've listened to people who have said, please don't tell anyone this. I haven't even told my husband that I've been married to for 50 years. When we handle a robbery case or a theft case, it's one or two people. When we do a sex abuse case, it's 8 people, it's 10 people, it's 12 people, it's 18 people. There's a real problem with this issue. And there is no way that having listened to literally hundreds of people share their stories with me, that I'm going to sit on the state appeal board and vote for a settlement that doesn't do anything to hold Dave Jamieson accountable and doesn't do anything to prevent future acts of sexual harassment by other people. What we need to be doing in these cases is sending a message to anyone who's in a position like that, that sort of behavior is not acceptable and it's going to cost them personally whatever they have. If Dave Jamieson has a rich uncle that dies 20 years from now, he shouldn't get a penny of it. It should all go to the state of Iowa. If he's got a lake house somewhere, we should be able to force it into sheriff's sale and get whatever proceeds there are. He cost the state of Iowa $4 million by doing terrible things to other people, and he should be held accountable for it. Now, Chris Godfrey case is related in the sense that it's another case where we're looking at paying expenses with public funds. And I don't think, in that case, that we've hit the standard that we need to ask Branstad personally to pay for the costs of the case. That's disappointed a lot of people in my own party, but I'm not really focused on partisanship. Like I said, I want to run this office in a way where we're focused on doing the right thing. I read the opening statements from trial, I read the closing arguments, I looked at some of the evidence, I read the case filings. I do not think that willful and wanton standard is hit. And so I think that's one where, according to the law, as it is currently written, we are all on the hook for it. However, I also don't think that we should be paying for an appeal in it. And here's why. If you weren't paying attention, Chris Godfrey, it's easy to miss stuff, I know, was the workers' comp commissioner. And he sued Branstad in the state of Iowa, saying that he had been discriminated against on the basis of his sexual orientation. It went up to the Supreme Court twice, because there were some pretty thorny legal issues. Then after that, it actually went to trial and got a verdict. The verdict at trial was that Godfrey had proved his case. They found a verdict for Godfrey for $1.5 million. They also found that verdict unanimously. That's important. Why? Well, they didn't have to. In a civil case in Iowa, at the point at which they were, when they were deliberating, they wouldn't have had to have had a unanimous verdict. They could have had a split verdict if there had been disagreement on the jury. Folks, there wasn't any disagreement. Eight people off the street, every one of them agreed. No, Godfrey proved it, $1.5 million. That tells us a lot, because those people sat there for 6 weeks and listened to evidence. If anybody else thinks they know the evidence better than those folks, that's pretty insulting. You hear a lot of stuff when you're there all day that doesn't get covered in the newspapers, let me tell you. Now, we have that verdict. We also know what the defense is. After all this, we finally heard what the defense was. And this was the defense. We were not, ladies and gentlemen, trying to get rid of Chris Godfrey because he was gay. We were trying to get rid of him because, and I quote, from defense counsel, so that there's no confusion, the people who put Terry Branstad in office didn't like the way Chris Godfrey did his job. The defense was that we were trying to serve our political patrons. It's pretty indefensible for a defense. Let me give you a few reasons why. Chris Godfrey's job, by design, is supposed to be not political. What do I mean by that? Well, the legislature gave it a 6-year term. You know what we elect for 6 years in Iowa at the state level? Nothing. Nobody. There is nobody that runs for office at the state level in Iowa and gets a 6-year term. U.S. Senate, sure. But the idea of having a 6-year term here is to get it away from politics, to get it out of the rhythm of politics, so that no one is campaigning saying, if I get elected, I will appoint this kind of person. It also requires confirmation. So you get picked by the governor, but then you've got to get confirmed by the Iowa Senate. One of the wonderful things we do in the Iowa Senate is we require a 2/3 majority for confirmation. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means you can't nominate someone just because your party controls the Senate and have your people in your party agree to appoint them. It means you actually have to have support from the other party. What that means in reality is you nominate someone that everybody looks at and they say, well, I might not agree with them on, divisive political issues, but they're competent for the job and they know how to do it and they're qualified, right? So Chris Godfrey got this job. He got confirmed, I believe, if not unanimously, then close, by the Iowa Senate, right? And you cannot fire the workers' comp commissioner. If they have active malfeasance, you can fire him for cause. So if he was doing the things that Dave Jamieson did, you can fire him for that. If he just wasn't showing up, wasn't doing his job, you can fire him for that. But the defense at trial agreed, what attorneys would call a stipulation. They stipulated there was no for-cause justification for firing Chris Godfrey, right? So at the end of the day, we have this jury verdict over this defense that we were just playing politics where politics isn't supposed to be. That in essence, the governor was reaching beyond the legal limits on the governor's power. Why would we as taxpayers pay more for that defense? It doesn't, yeah, good question. It doesn't make sense. Now we've heard it, they had their day in court. We shouldn't put any more money behind this. It's not a defensible defense. And I have said, if you want to look at this in a way that makes Terry Branstad the hero, you can do that. Terry Branstad, rather than just settling and paying a cost out of taxpayer funds, you can make the argument that he came out and he testified and he admitted that he was playing politics where politics didn't belong. That's a tough thing to admit, right? If you want to take that perspective on it, be my guest. Go right ahead. It can still get you to the idea that we should be done with this, that we should move on. I've looked at the issues in the case. I don't think there's any real likelihood that an appeal saves taxpayers money. most of the issues are related to evidence. You know what you get if you win an appeal on the basis of evidence wrongly admitted at trial? You just get a new trial.
Hey Rob, do
Yeah.
you want to switch to doing a couple questions before we have?
Oh.
We have to leave a little early to
Oh, okay.
beat the traffic.
So, the last thing I want to add about this, and I'll make it brief because it is important to me. This trial has been incredibly divisive and incredibly partisan. In their motion for a new trial, the defense in the case compared one of the state's witnesses to Hitler. And they want to be paid with taxpayer money to write sentences that compare an Iowan to Hitler. We should be done with this. We should be walking away with it. We should be paying our bills and covering our losses. So, questions? Yes,
Have they
sir.
appealed that?
They can appeal that. They haven't
They haven't.
decided.
Okay.
The reason that I wrote the letter that I did, when I wrote it, is because I'm hoping, I want them to know what I think about it. Because, so I sit on the State Executive Council. That is a board that has every statewide elected official. And the Attorney General's office provides counsel, so they don't get a vote. But we have to vote on whether or not to pay bills. And I've been voting for the bills because I've said litigation's complex sometimes. I worked on some very complex litigation in the Attorney General's office. But enough. So I'm telling them, before you decide whether to appeal this, you're not going to have my vote on paying bills for an appeal. And if we have one more person, either the governor or the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Agriculture agree, then we would know, hey, bills aren't going to get paid for an appeal. Because the person making the decision here is the client. It's the relationship between Governor Branson and Governor Reynolds that's making the decision about the appeal. Yes, Andy?
I certainly appreciate your comments about settlements, and I do think, I'm hopeful we'll see legislation this year to make people responsible for those expenses to the extent that we can.
Good.
But my question deals with the Godfrey case. $1.5 million is just a small part of the state's
Right.
responsibility. The attorney fees, I understand, could be as much as $7 or $8 million.
So what
And-
we're,
and my
go
question-
ahead.
My question to you is, as state auditor, do you have the responsibility, I guess, to take a look at these attorney fees and see if they're reasonable and
Yeah.
make recommendations?
Sure. So the attorneys, so the $7 or $8 million figure has included the verdict. Defense has filed a claim for, I think, they filed an amended claim within the last 3 weeks or so. And I think their amended claim is for about $3.5 million. And then we've paid about 1.5 or 2. So all told, including the verdict, we're looking at 7 or 8. I have some ability to review that, and I have. The first bill that I reviewed from Defense Counsel, actually I noticed about right about $3,000 worth of billing that was over the hourly rate that was in the contract. And so I wrote them a letter, and to their credit, they immediately agreed to back that $3,000 off of their next bill. On the plaintiff's side, they filed a post-trial motion for their payment, and the defense filed a claim against it, a counterclaim, to which the plaintiffs actually responded and lowered their amount. Strangely enough, while they were in trial, a decision was issued by the Iowa Supreme Court. It might not have been, if it wasn't while they were in trial, it was right before they went to trial, that affected whether or not they could collect attorney's fees for part of the claim. So the defense counsel pointed that out. The plaintiff's attorneys came back and said, good point, you're right, and removed that portion of it. So the defense attorneys have done a good job in that regard. They've looked at the plaintiffs, I've looked at the defense counsel's bills. It's hard to say ultimately precisely what the bills are because there's not a lot of specificity in them. But I will tell you, I noticed that the motion for the new trial was 180 pages long. Having talked to many attorneys, I've only encountered a couple who have heard of motions that long or longer. So I'm doing what I can on it. Whether or not we can parse out what's legitimate and what's not is a little bit harder, tougher road to hoe. Yes, sir.
Two things. One, on the Godfrey case, I wonder if Branstad could appeal on the basis of having incompetent counsel. But the second thing has to do with your distributing employees across the state. And it sounded like you made a pretty good case for that. But I wonder about supervision and accountability for those employees.
Good question.
And I'll just leave it. And then the other thing was about the request to have, you know, the same person come do the audit time after time.
Sure.
I wonder about relationships that might develop. And
Yep.
so, can you address those two things?
Yeah, you bet. Those are all good questions. Branstad does have competent attorneys. Well-respected law firm in town. I deeply disagree with some of the language they've put in their motions, as I mentioned. I have actually, even when somebody's motion was right, declined to join it because of the tone they took with the judge, just because they used the word apparently very often. Because you know what it means when somebody says apparently. It's mocking, it's condescending. And I've seen trial motions in cases that I handled where they said that to the court, and I said, you know what, you're right on the merits here, but I'm not going to join your motion because they're your tone. It's unnecessary and it's unacceptable. And all it does is spread negativity. You know what negativity does? It makes us pay for a lot more court time because we're paying for fighting instead of for problem solving. I trust that his attorneys put forward the best defense that was available under the facts. Supervision and accountability for our own employees. Our work is done in a program called engagement. Engagement is a program where you check a binder out like you would in the library, and then at the end of the day you check it back in again. So your supervisors are able to see your progress every single day. So if you're out in the field and you're working on something, we're able to see what you're doing. Same thing with email. We can see if you're responding to your emails on a timely basis, that sort of thing. So I don't think we're going to have a problem with accountability. Here's the other piece of that. People in my office are treated like adults. We assume that they're competent. We assume that they're well motivated. And if they prove themselves not to be, then we will act like adults and we'll get rid of them. Last part of the question.
Had to do with having the same person go back time
Oh,
after
yeah.
time and relationships.
It's a fair
develop.
concern. Having the same person go back from time to year after year only becomes a serious concern after a pretty long period. If you're not in the same town, if you're not in the same county, just seeing them about once a year to conduct their audit is going to tend to make you just more efficient at doing it more than adding risk. It can be a risk, relationships can be a risk, but in this situation I think the fact that you know how the client operates, that you know who to ask the right questions to, and you know where to look to get the documents, those efficiencies are going to outweigh any relationship that might eventually get built. Because again, even if you're starting to get to know someone, you're seeing them once a year for professional purposes, rather than necessarily hanging out with them on the weekends. And if they're hanging out with them on the weekends, then I want to know, because that's a different issue.
Hey Rob, that's gonna have to be the last question we got to.
One more.
Sorry. The community colleges administer the Iowa New Jobs Training Program,
Okay.
which IEDA oversees.
Okay.
For about 2 years or so, we've been having an audit of the program, and we were told it was supposed to come out in February, but we haven't seen it, and was just wondering if you had.
Is it from our office?
Yeah.
Have you got a business card on you?
Yeah.
I'll ask and I will follow up.
Okay. We were working with Joe Cunningham was overseeing it.
Jim.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Jim. Yeah.
Yep. Jim's a good guy.
Yeah. Seemed like it.
So, and I say this about everything. Personally, I don't tend to give timelines for when something's going to get finished, because you can be most of the way through an investigation, you can be talking to your last witness in the second half of the interview, and then you ask them some question and all of a sudden, whoa, we have a whole lot more work to do now. I did not expect that you were going to tell me that. And so things can get held up.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I like to not set that date is, if you set a date, well, then you have some date that you gave somebody when you didn't know what you didn't know. Make sense? Now you've uncovered that you got a lot more work to do, and so now your incentives are not aligned. Because you gave them a date, you're tempted to cut corners just to meet that date. I don't know what the situation is with this, but I'm happy to ask Jim
Okay.
and to get back in touch with you. You said you were thinking it was gonna be in June or
It
July?
was supposed to be out in February.
Oh, February.
Yeah.
Okay, that's before June or July.
Yeah.
I'm happy to ask him about it and give you a call back.
That'd be great.
Have you talked to him lately?
No,
Okay,
no.
okay.
So,
All right,
okay, thank you. I will
Super.
be down there, so.
are we? Okay.
Thank you everyone for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks.
We got more to talk about.
Yeah. What's that?
We got more to talk about.
What do you got?
University of Iowa, down to your umbrella.
Kinda not.
Okay. I was just wondering that, I read about the Children's Hospital, how that got so out of hand.
That's a fair question, and here's the quick and dirty on that. There is litigation that is going on around the Children's Hospital. Litigation results in public documents every time they're filed and results in a decision by a judge under law. If we were to also dive into the Children's Hospital, we would be duplicating the process that's already getting played out in court. We are in what I would call a target-rich environment. We have a lot of things that we can be digging into that we think we have reason to. When something is also in court, that moves it to the bottom of our list because we know that someone else is already looking at it.
Well, my question was, I understand that it's still in litigation. My question is who is the overseer from the state about some of the bad
Oh,
decisions
right.
made that created all
The
that?
first stop there would have been the audit department in the University of Iowa.
Because there was somebody down there that was making decisions about not
Right.
having the plans and doing a design build
Right.
without a set of plans.
Right.
And as I understand it, the building was supposed to be rectangular, that's what the plans had.
Right.
And it ended up old,
Yep. You're
with
not
no
wrong.
plans.
You're not wrong. There's also a different piece of this too where we have an ethical obligation in the auditor's office to work to avoid influencing management decisions. We have got to be independent. And if we're telling people what to do on the basis of a management decision, it threatens our independence. Because then they can say, oh, well, you want us to do that, what are you going to do for us over here? Compliance is a different issue. If there's a law that is written and they're not complying with it, we can say, hey, you're not complying with the law. But if what they're doing is arguably more of a management decision, then it's not quite our place to dig in. And where that line gets drawn varies sometimes. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.